All right, next up, let's talk running back Bijan Robinson. So Bijan Robinson finished last year as the RB9, which is kind of amazing, coming in for a rookie, but it was still a disappointment to a lot of people. I'm going to turn this off. It was still a disappointment to a lot of people who had Bijan Robinson on their fantasy teams. Why? Because you took him in the first rounds of drafts last year. It's a player I told you guys to exercise caution on. A lot of people were hyped up about it. And he might have had a bigger season if it wasn't for Arthur Smith, right? He finished last year just under 1,000 yards, 976 yards rushing, 4 touchdowns, 58 catches. So he had 58 receptions, 487 yards in the air, 4 touchdowns there. He left a lot to be desired. I mean, we had a game where he came in and was quote unquote sick and didn't play damn near the whole game. So there's a ton of potential with Bijan Robinson, who was touted as a generational running back prospect. I still think he has that. He just needs consistent touches. So this year should be completely different for Bijan Robinson, with Raheem Morris saying we want to get the ball in our studs' hands. I think we have a quarterback like Kirk Cousins. The defense has to respect the run game a lot more. Last year, there was a lot of the two-headed monster. Sometimes we would see Tyler Algier being used in the red zone. We would see Bijan being used in the red zone. A lot of question marks about how the Falcons were going to play things out. And it seems to me things are going to go as they should. Bijan should see a consistent amount of touches. And the hope and the goal is that they're still going to use him in red zone opportunities, which is where, that's where the RB1 conversation comes about. If he can be the RB1 in fantasy, it's going to be because he scores 10 to 15 touchdowns this season. So I think he'll be way more involved this year in offense. And to be honest, he has the ceiling of finishing as the best running back in fantasy football as soon as this year. He has that. Your question marks are going to be obviously Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall. You got your Saquon Barkley's up there, Jahmyr Gibbs. Those are other potential guys. But when it comes down to it, Bijan has just as good a chance as anybody to enter that, especially if he's just as involved as he was in the passing game last year with almost 60 catches. If he gets more work in the passing game, that raises his. All right, as far as receivers go, Drake London obviously is probably the biggest person to benefit out of the coaching change and out of the quarterback change with Kirk Cousins. He finished last year as the wide receiver 37 after getting drafted as a top 25 receiver. And he was expected to take a leap last year, but quarterback play really hurt him in his own inconsistencies. We saw Drake London. There would be weeks where he would go, with 1 or 2 catches, just inconsistent overall, which is expected out of some younger players. So last year he had 900 yards, 5 touchdowns. I think we can expect him to crack 1,000 yards a season and probably flirt with the 8 to 10 touchdown range. Kirk Cousins has a history of force feeding his number one targets. We saw that right last year with Justin Jefferson, the years past with Justin Jefferson. This is a perfect scenario for Drake London. So I expect him to be weekly with like a weekly floor of a wide receiver 2, especially if he's in that 1,000 to 1,200 yard conversation, somewhere around 8 to 10 touchdowns. This seems like a guy who's probably going to increase the amount of receptions he had last year as well. So I definitely think 1,000 yards is coming. Somewhere in the 80 to 90 catch range is coming. And I would assume over 8 touchdowns are coming this year for Drake London, who should definitely be in for a career year as the only wide receiver on this team. And then lastly, we got to talk about Kyle Pitts, who finishes the tight end 13 last year. We've had lofty expectations for Kyle Pitts. He had a strong rookie campaign, 1,000 yards, dealt with injury his second year, was slow to start last year. And at times was even outplayed by Jonnu Smith last year. So Jonnu Smith is now in Miami. He's no longer with this team. And the coaching regime has said, we got to get Kyle Pitts involved. Obviously, Kirk Cousins and him had a little back and forth about getting more targets this year due to a number change. Even though it didn't happen, you can expect Kyle Pitts to be a lot more involved in the offense. Last year, he only had 667 yards, 3 touchdowns. And this is a player that's definitely more talented than this. It's easy to get caught up on what could have been with Kyle Pitts so far, but I think it's time to turn a new page. We have new coaching, new quarterback. Things are looking up, and we saw what TJ Hawkinson was able to do in Minnesota. Kirk Cousins knows how to get the ball to his top targets, and Kyle Pitts is definitely that. Don't forget, he's still got the speed. He's still got the size. He's still got the hands and the talent. It's been a lot of quarterback play that's been the reason why we haven't seen Kyle Pitts do exactly what we know he's capable of doing. That's it. So I think this year we might even get Kyle Pitts at a good value just because there's a lot of hate about him. Oh, he's been an elite prospect, but he hasn't performed. that's kind of the narrative right now about Kyle Pitts. And I think he's one of the guys that we've targeted. We're like, yo, if this guy gets it, he's a generational tight end prospect. And I think, we forget that it takes tight ends sometimes a couple of years to adjust to the NFL game. He's dealt with injury, and last year coming off of an ACL injury, he needed a little bit of time early on. He wasn't even himself. So I think this year he challenges as a top 3 tight end. And if we see a full breakout, it could be a real monster season for Kyle Pitts. He was drafted to be more of a receiver than a tight end. Let's not forget that. And, when you got a guy in Arthur Smith who's making you block a lot more than you should, you're not going to have the same type of impact. I'm ready to see Kyle Pitts take off, and I think this is the year that I have.